My pleasure to be here this morning, and I'm pleased to be joined by Ed Martin, the President and CEO of Nalcor. Today we're going to release Manitoba Hydro International's independent review of wind energy. MHI were asked, and they answered two questions. The first is whether additional wind energy generation can be installed on the island to provide a firm supply of electricity to customers on the island over the long term. The second question they were asked and answered is whether wind energy can be the sole replacement for the 824 megawatt generating station at Muskrat Falls and the Labrador Island Transmission Link, as well as the Holyrood facility. Now, these questions stem from questions that have been asked of us over the last number of months. Over the last number of months, Nalcor and our government have been criticized for not having explored all options thoroughly, with the wind option being one of them, and for having focused only on Muskrat Falls. Although Nalcor had excluded wind at its Decision Gate 2 stage, and rightly so based on the MHI report, as you'll see, we felt as a government that it was prudent to have a wind report prepared, to ensure that all options were thoroughly examined and to either confirm or question Nalcor's conclusion. We did this not out of concern for Nalcor's conclusion, but with confidence that they were right. MHI has concluded that both of these reports that were relied upon in their report, being the Hatch study and the Nalcor study on voltage regulation, were technically sound, met their identified study goals, and were performed in accordance with best utility practices. So now let's get to their findings. On the first question, MHI concluded that Nalcor has incorporated the maximum amount of wind generation in the isolated island option based on the results of these studies. Now you'll see the difference between, and Ed may speak to this further, the difference I think was approximately 80 megawatts had been initially looked at as being integrated into the system. They've now, and Nalcor have included, I think, 279 megawatts of energy in terms of the isolated island option. So they looked at that. But MHI sticks with the 10% penetration level, and they don't go beyond that based on what's happening in the rest of the world. The highest wind penetrations they note in the world today are around 20%, and then there are systems that are interconnected. And in the report, I think they refer to Ireland as an example of that, but they refer to the interconnection between Ireland with Scotland and Great Britain. MHI also concluded that wind generation would not support the demand for electricity during peak periods on the island, and identifies that wind must be backed up by reliable firm energy sources. They look at published literature from around the world, places like Hawaii, United States, Europe, New Zealand. So their conclusion on the survey of practices and experiences in other jurisdictions was that a limit of 10% wind penetration capacity based on the isolated island scenario. So then they looked at the second question. So the first conclusion here is it's only at 10%. Then they went on to examine two theorized options. The first being 1,100 megawatts of wind being utilized with a 40% capacity factor and new combustion turbines for backup. They also looked at, now, somewhere in the MHI report, there's a picture of these big lithium batteries that that were utilized, using 1,100 megawatts of wind with lithium batteries as storage. They did a CPW analysis, cumulative present worth. They looked, that's an analysis tool, as you've heard, which is used to compare various projects. And this was their conclusion, that a wind and thermal scenario has a CPW of $11.9 billion and would be $3.49 billion more expensive than Muskrat Falls. The wind and battery scenario would have a CPW of $17.4 billion, or $9.06 billion more expensive than Muskrat Falls. So you essentially have one that's almost 50% more expensive, $3.5 billion, and a second one that's double the cost of Muskrat Falls. So even in the theorized options, the costs are significantly greater than Muskrat Falls. What I'd suggest to you is that this report is another endorsement of Muskrat Falls. It provides further support that Muskrat Falls is the best option to deliver least cost renewable power to Newfoundland and Labrador. Also, connection to the North American grid will further strengthen our ability to further develop our wind potential. Muskrat Falls will provide, as stated, a secure, clean energy future for our province and our wind resources, which are among the best in North America. In the MHR report, there's this very nice, colorful chart. It shows, I think, there's all kinds of oranges and reds, but the conclusion is that Newfoundland and Labrador has great wind resources. This MHI report is also consistent with meetings that we held in the United Kingdom earlier this year, where we met with, I think it was the Director of Climate Control for the UK, and they talked about the exciting wind projects that were going on in the United Kingdom. But the point being is that to utilize large amounts of wind, interconnection is crucial. Now, if anyone's read the MHI report, which I'm sure you all have, then you will see that MHI is pretty strong on us needing the power. So that what we have done today is release a report which establishes that wind is not a viable option. Tomorrow, we will release information concerning natural gas. We will look at the liquefied natural gas, and we will look at the pipeline, the Grand Banks pipeline, or the Bruno proposal. Muskrat Falls, and there's a chart here actually that's I'm sure you saw it yesterday, but it's one that I like, and I think it tells the story, is the CPW chart that looks at Muskrat Falls, looks at the various other scenarios, and you'll see where wind with thermal and wind with battery come on that chart. So, as stated yesterday, the time is right to pursue Muskrat Falls, and to quote from the president of Nalcor at the PUB, and I remember don't know what date it was, but he said the stars are aligned. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I pass it over to Ed now for some comments.
Well, thank you, Minister, and good morning. In 2010, Nalcor put forward 2 optimal scenarios for review at Decision Gate 2 or concept selection. Number 1, the isolated island option, and number 2, the interconnected option. To reach those optimal scenarios, Nalcor took a broad range of alternatives through a screening process based upon a number of criteria. Those criteria are 1, security of supply and reliability, 2, cost to ratepayers, 3, environmental considerations, 4, risk and uncertainty, and 5, the financial viability of unregulated elements. Initial screening is critical, as it enables Nalcor to concentrate further consideration and investment only on the technologies and alternatives that offer the highest potential of ensuring effective expenditure of ratepayers' funds. Newfoundland and Labrador has an excellent wind resource, as we all know. However, for the isolated island setting, the amount of wind power that can be integrated into the island grid is limited. Nalcor's previous work established 2 limits regarding the possible level of wind integration on the isolated island system. It established an economic limit and a technical limit. The economic limit occurs when wind generation results in a significant increase in the risk of spill at our large hydro reservoirs and is therefore clearly uneconomic. This would occur when reservoir levels are high and system loads were such that the system operator had to decide between curtailing wind generation or allowing water to spill over the dam. Either way, the economic advantage of the wind would then be limited. The study further determined that for wind generation above a certain level, it would not always be possible to maintain electrical system stability, particularly during periods of light load when wind generation would have to be curtailed, again precluding the economic benefit of the additional wind generation. Further study was completed prior to Decision Gate 3, determining that the limit could be increased up to approximately 300 megawatts or 10% overall. The 10% is the limit of what is seen around the world in isolated electricity systems. As a result, Nalcor then incorporated 270 megawatts of wind into the isolated island option, reducing fuel costs in that scenario even further. Despite this increase in wind generation in the isolated island scenario, Muskrat Falls continues to be the preferred alternative. This was supported by MHI in its review. As the Minister has noted, MHI was requested to disregard these technical limitations and proceed to assess theoretical options to replace Holyrood with wind generation in any event. This notion has been a source of speculation for some time. Nalcor has always understood that this was not possible, and we note that MHI's review reached the same conclusion. On top of the clear economic penalty for ratepayers, this option has serious operational and technical considerations. As I noted earlier in our initial screening criteria, subjecting electricity consumers to operationally risky technologies is not something we believe is prudent, sound utility practice. It's not something we will do. Wind power has a place in the electricity generation mix on the island, and due to its low environmental footprint, it will be incorporated whenever economically viable. This includes in the Muskrat Falls scenario. However, technical and operational considerations limit the amount of wind generation that can be operated on the system. Thank you.